There are certain debates in the world of football that I think are worth having. First, should every player be required to wear a mustache? I just kind of interested in seeing which ones can grow on and which ones can't, and which ones can match this voluptuous caterpillar on the upper lip, right? But it's going to go away soon, so say goodbye. We're definitely not keeping this bad boy forever. The second thing is this debate about who is actually the best player on the field, right? It's something that we obsess over all of the time, particularly in the era of Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi, which is the era I grew up in. There was basically one of two choices. You kind of pick the camp, which player you actually thought was better or had a bigger impact in the game or whatever metric you wanted to use. And then we just decided who the best player in the world was based off that. Now that Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi are aging out of that debate. One plays in Saudi Arabia, one plays in MLS, right? They're not playing in the best leagues in the world anymore. We've opened up a more broad debate, something that was going on before Lionel Messi and Ronaldo existed. And that is this debate about, who's the best player in the world? Well, there isn't a clear answer. There isn't a fine line. There isn't a point past which nobody will go. Nobody will insist, right, that Karim Benzema was the best player in the world at any one particular point, even though he won the Ballon d'Or, right? There was still this smoke screen of, well, it's Lionel Messi and it's Cristiano Ronaldo. And they still existed in the zeitgeist, right? We weren't going to have that debate. Or Luka Modric when he won the Ballon d'Or, right? Nobody was saying Luka Modric was legitimately the best player in the world, even though I do think he deserved the award. I've talked about that before. Now we're stuck with this Kylian Mbappe, Erling Haaland kind of debate where things aren't as clear, right? Vinicius, Jude Bellingham are involved in those sorts of conversations, and a host of other players that if they pop up with a particularly good season like Phil Foden, they get themselves into the conversation. I even saw Florian Wirtz getting Ballon d'Or shouts if Bayer Leverkusen had managed to complete the unbeaten treble, right? Like there is a lot of parity. There is a dearth of a clear group of contenders for the world's best player in the same way that there was before Messi and Ronaldo. And as such, that debate's kind of broken down a little bit. People look at Erling Haaland and they say, well, look at the numbers. Look at how many goals he scores. But if you watch the course of the match, you realize pretty quickly that what Roy Keane is saying is kind of right. I'm not saying Erling Haaland's a bad player. He's an amazing player, right? But he doesn't do everything, right? In the way that Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi are able to do, or even somebody like I'd say Luka Modric, who contributes more to the overall part of the game, but he puts up insane numbers because the dude's a sniper. He's an assassin, right? He's an unbelievable goal scorer, and that's what people remember. But when trying to figure out who the best player in the world is, people have to figure out what they value most. And there's something that almost nobody values, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. That's the reason why I feel like that debate can get a little annoying, because what I'm not going to include in this conversation about Toni Kroos is anything to have to do with his standing as where he ranks as one of the greatest midfielders of all time. Because frankly, I don't give a shit, right? Like, Toni Kroos deserves to be appreciated in this moment that he has decided to call it quits, right? We as a society have decided that when somebody retires or dies or whatever, that's the moment that we appreciate them. That's the moment we go over what they've accomplished. And I want to do that with Toni Kroos because I do believe that he has just been a fantastic player for a long time, and a fantastic player in a position that quite often gets taken for granted because it's not sexy, and you got to be a subscriber to like Opta analysts to really assess the type of impact that this guy has on a game, right? Even when you watch the match, if you're not paying attention to Toni Kroos, he can feel just, if you're watching the Champions League final, you're watching Dani Carvajal score the goal, but you're not necessarily paying attention to Toni Kroos crossing the ball, right? Every once in a while, he's able to find that brilliant, incisive pass like, we've seen earlier in the Champions League. But most of the time, he's just delivering the same thing everybody else delivers, just a little bit better. There's a couple of things that make Toni Kroos special, and I just wanted to go over them. The first bit is that Toni Kroos just was capable in his career of attempting more passes than basically anybody at a truly ridiculous success rate. Let me give you an example of perhaps how unappreciated he's been for so long. There was a Champions League game when he was still at Bayern Munich, and I'm pulling this from an Opta analyst article. They pointed it out in an article that is titled pretty accurately, Toni Kroos always makes the right decision. And it's talking about a Champions League last 16 match against Arsenal, where Kroos attempted 152 passes in one game. 152 passes in one game at Pep Guardiola's Bayern Munich, which was 59 more than the 4 starting midfielders on Arsenal combined. His completion percentage on those passes was 96.7%. Only one midfielder has attempted more passes in a Champions League game of any kind, right, since that night. And it was Rodri, obviously, but his completion percentage was 91%, right? Toni Kroos is somebody that was capable of inserting himself into a match to such a degree that he attempted so many passes at such a high completion rate that it actually boggled the mind and overwhelmed opposition teams. He never made a wrong decision. He also never made a wrong pass. That having more passes than a four-man midfield of the opposing team by 33% and then completing 97% of them. I mean, what chance did Arsenal have? Every time Toni Kroos got the ball and delivered it to somebody, it was accurate, and he did it once every 30 seconds. But there's something else about Toni Kroos that I really, what has actually stood out to me the most, right? Because those passes are often short, they're short and technically sharp, and it's death by 1,000 cuts when you're playing against Toni Kroos, and then every once in a while he breaks out the machete and just lops your defense right in half. But the thing that stood out to Toni Kroos the most to me is the one thing that seemed to stand out to everybody the most about Toni Kroos, and it's an underrated part about being an athlete at a world-class level. Toni Kroos, while probably faster than all of us, is definitely not somebody considered fast or strong, but his brain. Toni Kroos' brain, and I'm not talking about in the number crunching way where he's always able to find the right pass, because clearly he's able to do that, but his ability to handle pressure. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary, I'm trying to remember the name of it, Free Solo, where we're talking about this guy named Alex Honnold, who basically free soloing is the idea of world-class rock climbing, but you do it without any ropes. So if you fall, you die, basically. And they're talking about Alex Honnold, who's this guy who's trying to free solo this truly ridiculous thing in a national park in the US called El Cap. And he's basically been tested. And essentially, he just doesn't experience fear the same way that other people do. It sort of feels like Toni Kroos is in this same category where he doesn't experience pressure the same way other people do. There's a story that I always remembered from his brother Felix Kroos, who said, this was 3 years ago before the match against Liverpool in the Champions League. He said 20 minutes before facing Liverpool last night, Tony and I were discussing Osnabrück versus Regensburg in the second division. He never gets nervous. You can call him 5 minutes before a World Cup final and have a normal chat. And then, of course, in the Champions League, in the final, in the 74th minute, he delivers a corner, and it's his corner, really, that helps create the goal, right? He's delivered the same pass like 4 times during this match, and Dani Carvajal is able to put it away. We get the angle from the stands here, and just watch Toni Kroos, right? Toni Kroos delivers a corner, 15 minutes to go in the Champions League final. It's in the back of the net, and I know this guy shoots up in the way, but Toni Kroos, he doesn't really react. I mean, I'm sure he's excited. I'm sure he's incredibly happy. You know, he was kind of in tears after the game and relishing in the accomplishment that he'd had. But he's not somebody that feeds off the emotion of the moment. He's not somebody that feeds off the stage on which he is playing. He's somebody that if he is playing in training at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday or in the Champions League final in front of 1 billion people, he's going to be playing the exact same way. He's going to carry himself the exact same way. He's going to take one deep breath and then be able to handle the pressure. And I can't think of a more valuable attribute in somebody that plays as a deep-lying or kind of playmaking midfielder role than somebody that just isn't affected by pressure. He's going to go out there and do the same thing every single time, no matter what's going on, no matter if somebody's trying to 2-foot him from behind, right? Whether it's the frantic final 30 seconds of a tied match, or the team's up 5-0 and he's just out there, having a stroll in the park, right? If he's out there playing with his kids, or if he's got them, I don't even know, right? Like if he's out there just taking care of business with his friends in Sunday League, like he's going to be playing exactly the same way. His composure, his understanding that it's just a game. No matter how many people are watching you, it's just a game, and you can do it. It just seemed to be second to none. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody that handled the immense pressure that a lot of people talk about. I mean, people like David Beckham, people that are all-time legends of the game, talk about going to Real Madrid and the pressure's just different. Every time you lose a game, it feels like the world is ending. And Toni Kroos has been there for a decade, and it just doesn't feel like he's ever felt that pressure. I don't know if he might just be built different, because it certainly seems like it. But while I promise I'm not going to rank him in terms of where he is as one of the best midfielders of all time, the world is losing a great footballer. He's playing in the Euros this summer. This isn't the last time he's ever going to play, but I wanted to do my own homage to Toni Kroos now, because With his 1 Champions League title at Bayern and his 5 Champions League titles at Real Madrid, he is now tied for the most Champions Leagues ever won by a player with his teammates Nacho, Dani Carvajal, and Luka Modric. Real Madrid, obviously, I already made a video about it being the kings of everything, but this is to Toni Kroos because the game's not going to be the same without a player who for so long slipped under the radar, was in the shadow of Cristiano Ronaldo, was in the shadow of Karim Benzema, in the shadow of Vinicius and Rodrigo and Luka Modric. He's his own guy. And is as big a reason for them winning all the matches that they won as basically anybody else on that list. For Real Madrid, the German national team in the game in general is just going to feel different without the ridiculously steady presence of Toni Kroos in that Real Madrid midfield. Been there for a decade. It was a pretty good decade.